Welcome to the debate debrief for week 5. Our topic of the week was what is better for longer term welfare, nudging or education? We had 4 expert opinions on the debate video. To begin with, we had Adele Atkinson from the OECD and Professor Anna Maria Lusardi from George Washington University, who both made the point that education is critical, especially in the financial well-being domain. Education is empowering. Education allows people to better understand the environment around them. And education, in fact, lets people figure out what is the optimal choice for themselves. I then presented a series of arguments based on my own work as well as work of others, showing that education itself is not enough, that in fact nudging is important, choice architecture is important, because at the end of the day, education can tell people what they should do and what they want to do, but only nudging can actually get them to do it. So, for example, nudging is great at getting people to open bank accounts, to sign up for fitness memberships, and so on and so forth. And so the point is that oftentimes we are in situations where we know what the right choice is, but we need to be pushed or prodded or nudged into actually making it. And then we heard from my colleague, Professor Avni Shah, who also talked about why nudging is important. And Avni presented several good arguments in terms of why nudging trumps pure education. And towards the end of the video, Avni also spent a bit of time talking about an initiative that she and others at the University of Toronto's Bear Center have been working on, an initiative called Financial Literacy in a Box, where you try and take some sort of a nudging intervention to improve the efficiency of financial literacy. Some good arguments to be made on both sides of the debate. Education is empowering. Choice architecture could be more passive. Education is helping people understand what they need to do and not just helping them get things done, and so on and so forth. Now, there's clearly good points to be made on both sides of the debate. But what I'm going to do today is to bring in opinions from another expert, John Lynch, who is a professor at the University of Colorado's Leeds School of Business. John also leads the Center for Financial Decision Making there, and is the author of a very famous study where he and his colleagues look at a meta-analysis of 168 different financial literacy initiatives to show that overall, looking across this entire swath of data, that the correlation between financial literacy initiatives and decision making is actually pretty low. And so one naive conclusion you could make from that analysis is that financial literacy doesn't work. Having said that, there are many other more nuanced interpretations of the data, some which say that financial literacy just in time actually works better. Financial literacy coupled with other initiatives works better. But let's hear what John has to say about the whole notion of nudging versus education.
So which is better if we're trying to improve consumers' long-run welfare? Is it better to invest our resources in financial education or in nudging? My point of view is that there's scope for each. That nudges work best in situations where all consumers need pretty much the same thing. So if, for example, we're talking about organ donation, there's not a lot of heterogeneity or differences of opinion among people in terms of whether they think that donating an organ is a good or a bad thing, then a nudge, like a default, can be a very effective way to help us do what I think most people think they would like to do. But there's a lot of domains of decision making where what's good for me may not be what's good for you. For example, should we have a fixed rate mortgage or should we have an adjustable rate mortgage, for instance? And in those domains, when different people need different things, then I think that consumers have to know something in order to choose for themselves. So it's really a matter of is this a behavior where there's most people need the same thing or want the same thing? I would say one of the things that has been argued by the proponents of nudging is that financial education has had pretty mixed success. My research shows that financial education effects decay dramatically over time. So we have to be sensitive to the idea that if we're trying to make consumers better off by financial education, the education has to be what I call just-in-time financial education, close in time to the specific decision we're trying to influence. Otherwise, what my research shows is that if you give somebody a course, for example, it's a financial education course, and try to look for effects on behaviors 2 years later, there's really nothing. So financial education has a role, but it has to be timely, has to be targeted to a particular decision, and it's going to be most useful in those cases where different consumers need different things.
All right, so a couple of initiatives. Overall, it strikes me that there are two ways in which we could think about the nudging versus education debate. To start off with, like many of the other debates, I think maybe pitching this as a nudging or education debate was perhaps simplistic. That we need to think about how do we incorporate both approaches into helping people make better decisions. One way in which we can do this is to think about the starting problem. We talked in this course that oftentimes getting people started on an initiative is the hardest part. We need to get people to open bank accounts. And once they open bank accounts, for example, education is important because they need to know what to do with the account. And the same is the case for retirement plans. The same is the case for any other program, weight loss programs, health initiatives, exercise and fitness regimens, and so on and so forth. Getting started is often a challenge, and that's where choice architecture might play a big role, or incentives might play a big role, getting people started on the path. But as we go through the path, I think education does become more important to help people better understand what they need to do. So that's one, one way of thinking about the issue. The other issue is the one that John brings up, right? And as John puts it, there are oftentimes places or domains in which we want everybody to do the same thing, everybody in the marketplace to do the same thing, and that's where nudging is great. But oftentimes there are also domains where we want different people to do different things, and that's where education might play a role. So one example from Canada has to do with one of our pension plans called the Canada Pension Plan, where you can take benefits starting from a given age, let's say at age 62, or you can choose to defer the benefits till you reach age 70. And of course, the more you defer, the bigger your check is every month when you start getting those checks. So the question is, when do we start taking those benefits? And at some level, you could say, well, look, it kind of depends on what your expectations are in terms of life expectancy. So for example, I have, let's imagine I have two uncles. One uncle comes from the side of the family where all the men live long, up to the age of 80, 90, 95. And from his side of the family, the expectation that he's going to live long is high, he's healthy, and it might make sense from a net present value perspective for him to defer the payments to as late as possible. On the other hand, I have this other hypothetical uncle where the men die early, he's got a family history of disease, and so from his perspective, maybe it is better to start taking the checks early. That's where education plays a role. That's where a better understanding of the decision-making context plays a big role. And this is not a decision that can be simply nudged, right? Avni made the point about financial literacy in a box, and I think that's exactly the point that follows from this example of my two hypothetical uncles. So if you actually think about financial literacy or health literacy or privacy literacy, or in fact any literacy program, a couple of challenges with them. One is that they're delivered at a time where the decision maker isn't ready to make a decision. So I can learn about how to, get a good mortgage or how to plan my retirement at age 30, but by the time I actually get to the point where I'm making a decision, I tend to have forgotten those details. That's one. I think the other one is that a lot of our education is conceptual. It's not rule based. It doesn't give me a good rule of thumb in making a decision. And so financial literacy in a box tries to address that. It tries to link what you've learned in a financial literacy program by giving you a tool. That tool could be a wallet card, an app, where you can take that conceptual knowledge and convert that into a good rule of thumb into making a better decision when it actually comes time for you to do that. So that's the issue here. The question really is, how do we best combine the benefits of education with choice architecture or incentives? Thank you again for participating in this week's debate. That was week 5. Before you know it, we are down to week 6, where we will have one final debate on BE101x.